Hi, Michael and Sarah. After conducting an array of screening tests, I have decided that the most appropriate course of action is to conduct an assessment called the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals Preschool Second Edition, or SELF-P2, the Australian and New Zealand version of which was published in 2006 in Sydney. Now, the SELF-P2 is a standardized assessment tool designed to identify, describe, and evaluate language deficits in children aged 3 to 6 years old. I'm hoping that by administering this assessment, I'll be able to determine a number of things about Grace's overall language use. Namely, does she have an impairment? And if so, what is the nature of this impairment? How does Grace's language use compare to other children in the same age group? Thirdly, does Grace have the necessary skills to enter school and begin learning how to read? And finally, are Grace's pragmatic skills up to scratch? Does she understand how to use language in different ways depending on the social context? Now, the assessment itself is divided into 4 stages, each of which corresponds to one of these goals. Therefore, the first stage is responsible for determining if a language disorder is present. This is achieved by administering 3 subtests measuring word structure, sentence structure, and expressive vocabulary. If at this point no language impairment can be found, then the assessment will end then and there. However, if we do detect one, then we will have a few options in front of us regarding how we choose to proceed. We might decide to simply administer the remaining stages sequentially until the entire assessment has been completed. Or we might pick and choose individual stages to complete based on Grace's individual communicational troubles. Or in other words, we might simply choose to do the parts of the assessment that are most relevant to Grace. Finally, the assessment itself should only take about 15 to 20 minutes to administer, so it shouldn't be too much of a hassle to fit in, considering your busy schedules. This is Harry Rispin, signing off. I hope to hear from you soon. Goodbye. Okay guys, so I've completed my assessment of Grace's language ability using the SELF-P2 assessment tool, and I've been able to determine that Grace has a core language index score of 81. The core language index score is a figure that we use to summarize the 3 subtests that were administered in stage 1 of the assessment. It's useful because it provides us with this overall number that we can use to compare Grace to the other kids in her age group. So what does a score of 81 actually mean? Well, in statistics, when a set of data is dispersed so that the majority of scores fall somewhere in the middle, the data set is said to have a normal distribution. And you can see that when we represent this information graphically, it tends to look like the curve of a bell, with a peak in the middle and 2 symmetrical slopes on either side. In addition, we can further describe how wide or narrow this curve is using what's called the standard deviation. To elaborate, the standard deviation describes how far away each data point is away from the middle. This means distributions with a high standard deviation will be more spread out, and distributions with a low standard deviation will be comparably more bunched together. Importantly, we can also use standard deviation to describe where specific data sits in the distribution in relation to the rest of the data. For example, we know that for all normal distributions, 68% of the data can be found between one standard deviation on either side of the middle. Furthermore, in this case, the middle is a term that we're using to describe what's called the mean, which is derived by calculating all the values in the dataset together and dividing by the total number of values. This is all important because core language index scores in the SELF-P2 actually form a normal distribution. This normal distribution has a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15, which means that Grace's score of 81 places her just outside the normal range. Furthermore, the results also indicate that she scored at the 12th percentile, which is another way of saying that she scored higher or equal to 12% of children who have undertaken the test. Conversely, this also means that she scored below 88% of children that have taken the test as well. Unfortunately, based on these results, it seems that Grace has a mild language delay.